In the depths of space where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species fear to acknowledge. Hunger drives all creatures to their breaking point. When the Kythara, beings who feed on the life force of other sentient species, arrived at the Galactic Council's emergency session, their once proud forms reduced to skeletal shadows, every delegate knew that desperation had reached a new level. The Kythara had ruled through fear for millennia, their very presence draining the vitality from those around them. But now, as their homeworld died and their food sources dwindled, they faced extinction. No species would willingly sacrifice themselves to feed their ancient predators. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the Council would condemn an entire race to starvation or find an impossible solution. Then humanity spoke up. The youngest species in the Council, barely a century into interstellar travel, made an offer that would either doom their race forever or redefine what it meant to be human in a universe full of monsters. What happened next would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization and prove that sometimes the most terrifying predators in the universe are no match for human compassion and human ingenuity. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for the first time in 3 centuries, and Ambassador Sarah Chen could feel the tension crackling through the vast crystalline chamber, like electricity before a storm. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated atmospheric bubbles, each one maintaining careful distance from the delegation that had prompted this unprecedented gathering. The Kythara. Sarah had studied them extensively during her preparation for this assignment, but seeing them in person was entirely different. Where the historical records showed tall, elegant beings with midnight black skin that seemed to absorb light itself, the 3 Kythara delegates before the council were barely recognizable. Their once imposing 7-foot frames had withered to skeletal proportions, their obsidian skin now dull and cracked like dried earth. Most disturbing were their eyes, previously described as deep wells of starlight, now appeared as hollow, desperate voids. The lead Kythara delegate, who had introduced himself as Vorthak, swayed slightly as he spoke. His voice, transmitted through the Council's universal translation matrix, carried a tremor that had nothing to do with technology. "Honored Council members," Vorthak began, his words accompanied by the subtle energy drain that all Kythara naturally emitted, though Sarah noticed it was significantly weaker than the historical accounts suggested. "We come before you not as conquerors, not as the empire we once were, but as a dying race seeking mercy." A ripple of shock traveled through the assembly. The Kythara had been the dominant predator species in the galaxy for over 2 millennia. They sustained themselves by feeding on the life force of other sentient beings, not killing them outright but draining their vitality over time, leaving their victims weakened, aged, and often dead within years of exposure. Entire civilizations had been reduced to breeding farms for Kythara sustenance. The Zephyrian delegate, a crystalline being whose translucent form flickered with nervous energy, was the first to respond.
"You speak of mercy, Vorthak, but your people showed none when they harvested the outer colonies of my homeworld."
12 billion Zephyrians died feeding your empire's hunger. The Altarians remember too, added another voice. This one belonging to a reptilian being whose scales shifted from green to angry red. 3 centuries of forced tribute. Our people still speak your name as a curse. Similar accusations arose from around the chamber. The Kythara had made enemies of nearly every major civilization in the galaxy. Now, in their moment of ultimate vulnerability, those same civilizations were being asked to provide aid. Sarah watched as Vorthak's companions, a female named Nysara and a younger male called Thek, drew closer to their leader for support. The physical contact seemed to help them maintain their composure, though Sarah's enhanced visual senses could detect the way their forms continued to deteriorate even during the session. We acknowledge the pain we have caused," Vorthak continued, his voice growing weaker. "But our homeworld, Kithros Prime, is dying. The stellar collapse has poisoned our biosphere. Our population has fallen from 12 billion to fewer than 50,000. We have perhaps months before total extinction." The Andromedian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell, pulsed with what Sarah recognized as skeptical amusement. "And you expect us to volunteer as food sources? To willingly submit to the very fate you inflicted upon our ancestors?" "We ask only for enough to survive," Nysara spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "A small number of volunteers from each species. We would take only what we need, nothing more. We offer our entire technological database in exchange, 3 millennia of advanced science, including our biotechnology and energy manipulation techniques." The chamber erupted into heated discussion. Several delegates stood and began speaking simultaneously, their words creating a cacophony of anger, fear, and disbelief. Sarah remained seated, analyzing the situation while her fellow human delegates, Admiral Torres and Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, whispered urgently beside her. "This is madness," Torres muttered. "They're asking us to voluntarily submit to parasitism. Even if we could trust them to take only what they need, which we can't, the precedent would be catastrophic." Dr. Reyes nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "On the other hand, their biotechnology could advance our medical capabilities by centuries, and there's something to be said for preventing genocide, even of a species like theirs." Sarah listened to the debates raging around them. The scientific community representatives were intrigued by the technological offering, while the military delegates were universally opposed to any arrangement that would strengthen the Kithara. The smaller species worried about becoming primary targets if they agreed to the proposal. "What do you think, Sarah?" Torres asked. "You're the lead diplomat here. What's Earth's position going to be?" Before Sarah could answer, the Council's senior moderator, an ancient cetacean whose aquatic tank dominated the center of the chamber, activated the silence field. The arguments cut off instantly, leaving only the gentle hum of life support systems. "The Kithara proposal has been heard," the cetacean announced, her translated voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience. "Each species will now have the opportunity to respond. We will proceed in order of Council seniority." One by one, the established civilizations delivered their verdicts. The Zephyrians refused, as expected. The Altarians not only refused, but demanded that the Kithara be left to face their extinction as consequence for their past crimes. The Andromedians offered scientific collaboration, but refused to provide biological sustenance. The pattern continued. Technological trade was acceptable, but no one would volunteer their people as food sources. As the responses continued, Sarah noticed the Kithara delegates growing weaker. The kid actually collapsed into his chair, barely conscious, while Nasara had wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold her very essence together. Vorthak remained standing, but Sarah could see the tremendous effort it required. 23 species had refused direct biological aid when the moderator's gaze fell upon the human delegation. As the newest member of the Council, humanity would speak last, a position that had seemed merely ceremonial until this moment. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the chamber upon her. She had been humanity's voice in the Council for 3 years, but never had the stakes been this high. Not just for the Kithara, but for how humanity would be perceived going forward. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "Humanity has listened carefully to all perspectives presented today. We understand the historical grievances against the Kithara. We do not dismiss the pain they have caused or the justified anger of their victims." She paused, noting the nods of approval from several delegates. This was the expected opening. Acknowledgement of the Kithara's crimes followed by refusal to aid them. "However," Sarah continued, "humanity also recognizes that we are witnessing the potential extinction of an entire sentient species. While we cannot condone their past actions, we refuse to stand by and watch genocide occur when we have the power to prevent it." The chamber stirred with surprise. Several delegates leaned forward in their environmental bubbles, while others began whispering urgently among themselves. "Therefore," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, "humanity offers itself as a voluntary food source for the Kithara refugees." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the normally ever-present hum of environmental systems seemed muted by the shock of her words. Sarah could see the disbelief on faces throughout the chamber, and something approaching desperate hope in the hollow eyes of the Kithara delegates. Admiral Torres grabbed her arm. "Sarah, what are you doing? You don't have authorization for this kind of commitment." But Sarah gently pulled free and continued. "We do not make this offer lightly. Humanity proposes a structured program of voluntary life force donation, with strict oversight and limitations. We will provide a rotating volunteer corps, with each individual contributing only small amounts of life force over extended periods, ensuring no permanent harm to our people, while still meeting the Kithara's survival needs." The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline form flashed angry red. "Are you insane? You're talking about feeding yourselves to predators. This sets a precedent that will endanger every species in the galaxy." "On the contrary," Sarah replied calmly. "This establishes that the Council is capable of mercy even for former enemies. It demonstrates that we can rise above cycles of vengeance to find solutions that preserve life." The Altarian representative slammed a scaled fist against his console. Easy words when your species has never suffered under Kithara rule. You have no idea what you're offering. Perhaps not, Sarah acknowledged. But we know what we're preventing. The complete extinction of a species that, regardless of its past crimes, deserves a chance at redemption. Vorthak suddenly stepped forward, his movement causing several delegates to instinctively recoil. Human ambassador, he said, his voice thick with emotion Sarah hadn't expected from his species. You would truly do this, after everything my people have done? Sarah met his hollow gaze directly. Yes, but with conditions. First, this arrangement is temporary. 5 Earth years maximum. During that time, the Kithara must establish sustainable colonies away from inhabited systems and develop alternative sustenance methods. Second, any aggression or attempt to feed beyond the agreed parameters will immediately void this agreement. Third, the Kithara will provide complete access to their biotechnology and will assist in developing artificial life force synthesis to eventually replace biological feeding entirely. The chamber erupted once again, but Sarah could see that the dynamic had shifted. While many delegates were horrified by humanity's offer, others were beginning to consider the implications. The mechanoids, a synthetic species that had no biological life force to drain, expressed cautious interest in the technological exchange aspects. Several younger civilizations seemed impressed by humanity's willingness to take such a risk for the sake of mercy. Dr. Poppia. Reyes leaned close to Sarah's ear. Do you realize what you've just committed us to? We're talking about systematically allowing aliens to feed on human life force. The public reaction back home will be... The public reaction will be whatever we make it, Sarah replied quietly. And we're not allowing anything. We're establishing a controlled, voluntary program with unprecedented safety measures and scientific oversight. The cetacean moderator activated the silence field once more. The human proposal has been heard. As it represents a significant modification to the Kithara request, this council will recess for 6 hours to allow all delegates to consult with their respective governments. We will reconvene to vote on the amended proposal. As the chamber began to empty, Sarah noticed that the Kithara delegates remained in their seats. Vorthak was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been shame all mixed together. Ambassador Chen, he called out as she gathered her materials. Might I speak with you privately? Sarah hesitated, aware that Admiral Torres was giving her a warning look. But curiosity won out. Very well. Conference room 7 should be available. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Vorthak in the small, sterile meeting room. Up close, the Kithara's deterioration was even more apparent. His skin had a translucent quality that revealed the dark network of what she assumed were blood vessels beneath, and his breathing was labored. Why? He asked simply. Because it's the right thing to do, Sarah replied, and because humanity believes in second chances. Vorthak was quiet for a long moment. In our entire history, no species has ever offered aid to the Kithara without coercion. We have been conquerors, predators, the darkness that other civilizations warn their children about. Why should you be different? Sarah considered her answer carefully.
Maybe because we haven't been in the galaxy long enough to hate properly.
Or maybe because we've learned something from our own history about the dangers of letting entire groups die while we watch. Your proposal, Vorthak continued, the artificial synthesis research, you truly believe it's possible to create alternatives to biological feeding? I believe it's worth trying, Sarah said. Your people have had millennia to perfect life force manipulation. Surely some of that knowledge could be turned toward creation rather than consumption. For the first time, something like hope flickered in Vorthak's hollow eyes. There have been experiments that were abandoned when conquest proved easier than innovation. With your biotechnology and our energy manipulation techniques.
Exactly, Sarah said.
This isn't just about keeping your people alive for 5 years. It's about finding a permanent solution that lets the Kithara survive without victimizing other species. Vorthak leaned back in his chair, a gesture that seemed to require considerable effort. If your council approves this proposal, my people will be forever in humanity's debt. I do not say this lightly. The Kithara have never acknowledged debt to anyone. We're not doing this for gratitude, Sarah replied. We're doing it because extinction is forever, and we're not ready to make that decision for anyone. As Sarah returned to prepare for the resumed session, she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had just stepped onto a path that would change everything. Not just for the dying Kithara, but for humanity's role in the galactic community. The real challenge was just beginning. The vote had been closer than anyone expected. 24 species supported humanity's amended proposal, 19 opposed it, and 4 abstained. The narrow victory meant that the Kithara Refugee Assistance Program, as it was officially designated, would proceed under the most intensive oversight in Council history. 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the observation deck of Research Station Prometheus, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as the first group of human volunteers underwent their initial life force donation session. The station hung in the void between Earth and Mars, deliberately positioned to be isolated from major population centers while still maintaining easy transport access. Vital signs remained stable across all 20 volunteers, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the program's chief medical officer. Her voice carried through the intercom system as she monitored the procedure from the medical bay. Life force extraction is proceeding at exactly 0.3 units per hour, well within the established safety parameters. Webb nodded, making notes on his tablet. As the program's scientific director, he had spent the last 6 months developing protocols that would allow the Kithara to feed without causing permanent damage to their human donors. It had been the most challenging project of his career, requiring him to essentially invent an entirely new field of biomedical science. The volunteers lay on specially designed beds within a transparent chamber, electrodes monitoring everything from brain activity to cellular regeneration rates. Across from them, separated by another layer of protective barriers, 3 Kithara refugees, not the original delegates, who had been too weak to travel to the research station, slowly absorbed the carefully regulated flow of human life energy. The transformation was remarkable. When these 3 Kithara had arrived, 2 weeks ago, they had been barely alive, their forms so withered that Webb had wondered if they would survive the journey. Now, with regular feeding sessions, their skin had regained some of its characteristic luster, and they could stand and move without assistance. Dr. Fio, Webb, called out Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, one of the volunteers. Her voice was slightly weaker than normal, but still strong. How are we looking from a donor perspective? Webb activated the intercom. All your readings are excellent, Lieutenant. You're experiencing approximately 8% life force depletion, which should fully regenerate within 72 hours based on our models. The models were theoretical. Humanity had never attempted anything like systematic life force donation before. But Webb's team had worked closely with the surviving Kithara researchers to understand the mechanics of their feeding process. What they had discovered was fascinating and somewhat disturbing. Life force, as the Kithara understood it, wasn't some mystical energy but rather a measurable quantum field generated by the complex interaction of consciousness, biological processes, and what humans might call soul resonance. The Kithara had evolved specialized organs that could detect and absorb this energy from other sentient beings. In their natural feeding process, they would drain this energy completely, leaving their victims as empty husks. But with careful regulation and willing donors, the process could be controlled. Humans, it turned out, regenerated life force more quickly than most species, a trait that Webb suspected was connected to humanity's rapid adaptability and resilience. Dr. Webb, came another voice through the intercom, this one belonging to Zethis, one of the Kithara refugees. I must express again how unusual this sensation is for my people. To feed without taking everything, to sense willing offering rather than desperate resistance, it is almost overwhelming. Webb had grown accustomed to the Kithara's formal speaking patterns over the past months. Despite their fearsome reputation, the refugees were remarkably cooperative and seemed genuinely committed to the rehabilitation program. I'm glad the process is working for you, Zethis, Webb replied. How are you feeling in terms of satisfaction and energy levels? The feeding is sufficient, Zethis responded after a moment's consideration. Not abundant as our people once knew, but enough to maintain health and consciousness. More importantly, the absence of fear and pain from our food source creates an entirely different experience. We had forgotten that feeding could be peaceful. The session continued for another hour before Webb called for termination. The volunteers were moved to recovery rooms for observation, while the Kithara refugees returned to their own quarters for rest and monitoring. Initial data looked promising, but Webb knew they would need months of continued observation to fully understand the long-term effects. As the volunteers were settling into their recovery period, Admiral Torres arrived on the station for his monthly inspection. Webb met him at the docking bay, noting the man's consistently skeptical expression. "How's our grand experiment proceeding, Doctor?" Torres asked as they walked through the station's corridors. The Admiral had been opposed to the program from the beginning and made no secret of his concerns. "Better than expected, actually," Webb replied, pulling up data on his tablet. We've completed 18 feeding sessions across 6 different volunteer groups. No permanent damage to any human participants, and the Kithara refugees have shown steady improvement in health and stability. They entered Webb's laboratory, where holographic displays showed complex biological readouts and energy pattern analyses. Torres studied the data with the eye of someone who had been briefed extensively on the science behind the program. "And the artificial synthesis research?" Torres asked. "Please tell me we're making progress toward getting humanity out of the business of being alien food." Webb smiled, despite the Admiral's blunt phrasing. "Actually, that's where things get really interesting. Working with the Kithara researchers, we've identified the specific quantum signatures that define life force. We believe we can synthesize artificial life force using a combination of quantum field generators and bioneural processing matrices." He gestured to a complex device in the corner of the lab that hummed with barely contained energy. "That's our prototype synthesizer. We've managed to produce small amounts of artificial life force, though it's not yet stable enough for actual feeding trials." "How long until it's ready?" Torres asked. "Conservative estimate, 18 months for a working prototype, another year for production-scale units. But, Admiral, even when we perfect the technology, we may want to continue some level of voluntary donation." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Care to explain that reasoning, Doctor?" Webb pulled up another set of data. "The Kithara who are feeding on willing human donors are showing psychological changes we didn't anticipate. They're becoming less aggressive, more cooperative, more empathetic. We think the emotional context of their feeding affects their neural development." "You're saying that being fed by volunteers instead of victims is making them more human-like?" "In a sense, yes. The Kithara evolved as predators, but they also evolved to be influenced by the emotional state of their food sources. Centuries of feeding on fear and desperation shaped their psychology in ways they're only now beginning to understand. Feeding on willing donors who feel positive about helping seems to be reversing some of those psychological patterns." Torres was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "So you're telling me that not only are we keeping them alive, we might actually be rehabilitating them into less dangerous beings?"
That's the theory.
"And if it's correct, this program could be the foundation for permanent peace between humanity and the Kithara." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communications center. Webb's assistant, Dr. Jennifer Park, appeared on the wall display looking concerned. "Dr. Webb, Admiral Torres, we have a situation developing. We're receiving emergency transmissions from the Kithara homeworld." They rushed to the communications center, where the main display showed a weak signal from the dying Kithros Prime. The image was distorted and fragmented, but they could make out the desperate form of what appeared to be a Kithara official. "Humanitarian crisis beyond our calculations," the transmission was saying. "Population collapse accelerating. Less than 30,000 remain alive. Stellar radiation increasing. Request immediate expansion of assistance program." The signal cut out, leaving silence in the communications center. Webb and Torres exchanged glances, both understanding the implications immediately. "How many refugees are we currently supporting?" Torres asked. 12, Webb replied. "We designed the program around keeping a small population alive while developing alternatives. But if we're talking about 30,000 survivors, that would require a massive expansion of the volunteer program," Torres finished. "We're talking about thousands of human donors, multiple facilities, resources we simply don't have allocated." Webb was already running calculations on his tablet. "Actually, with refinements to our process and expanded volunteer rotations, we might be able to support a larger population. But you're right about the scale. This would become humanity's largest humanitarian operation in history. And the most controversial," Torres added grimly. "The program barely passed the council vote as is. Expanding it to this size would require approval from the UN Security Council, probably a global referendum." Before Webb could respond, another alert sounded. This time, it was Dr. Beale. "Tanaka from the medical bay. Doctor. Webb, you need to see this immediately. We're getting unusual readings from the volunteers in recovery." They hurried to the medical bay, where Tanaka was studying bio-readout displays with a puzzled expression. The 20 volunteers from the morning session were all awake and alert, but their readings showed something unexpected. "What am I looking at?" Webb asked. "Life force regeneration rates are accelerating beyond our models," Tanaka explained. "Instead of taking 72 hours to return to baseline, they're showing full recovery in less than 24 hours. But that's not the strange part." She pulled up more detailed scans. "Their overall life force capacity has increased. They're not just recovering what they donated, they're regenerating beyond their original levels. Webb stared at the data in amazement. Are you saying that donating life force is somehow enhancing their natural life force generation? That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like the donation process is training their bodies to produce more life force. The volunteers are actually becoming healthier and more vital than they were before they started. Admiral Torres looked between the two scientists. Let me make sure I understand this. Our volunteers are not only unharmed by the process, they're actually being improved by it. The data suggests exactly that, Tanaka confirmed. We need more long-term studies to be certain, but if this pattern holds, volunteering for the program might actually extend human lifespan and enhance physical capabilities. The implications were staggering. If donating to the Kithara actually benefited humans, the political landscape around the program would shift dramatically. Instead of a noble sacrifice, it would become an opportunity for human enhancement. We need to verify this immediately, Webb said. Run full medical workups on all previous volunteers, compare their current status to their baseline measurements from before the program began. As Tanaka rushed off to begin the expanded analysis, Torres turned to Webb with a thoughtful expression. Doctor, if what we're seeing is accurate, this changes everything, not just for the Kithara crisis, but for humanity's future. We're looking at a symbiotic relationship that benefits both species. Webb nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. And if we can scale up the program to handle the entire Kithara refugee population, we're not just preventing extinction. We're potentially creating the first true interspecies partnership based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation.
The next few hours brought a steady stream of revelations.
Analysis of previous volunteers confirmed the pattern. Every human who had participated in the donation program showed enhanced vitality, improved immune function, and measurable increases in physical and mental performance. Meanwhile, psychological evaluations of the Kithara refugees revealed continued positive changes. They were becoming more collaborative, showing genuine remorse for their species' past actions, and expressing interest in finding ways to contribute to galactic society beyond mere survival. As Webb compiled his findings for transmission back to Earth, he realized that humanity's gamble on mercy was paying dividends no one had anticipated. The program that had begun as a desperate attempt to prevent genocide was evolving into something that could transform both species. But with the crisis on Kythros Prime escalating and 30,000 lives hanging in the balance, the real test of humanity's commitment to this strange new partnership was just beginning. 2 years after the first emergency council session, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Concordia, humanity's largest diplomatic vessel, as it approached the newly established Kithara settlement on Kepler, or 42C. The planet hung before them like a blue-green jewel, its continents dotted with the silver gleam of rapidly growing cities. Population count is now at 28,437, reported Captain Morrison, who had been one of the original volunteers and now served as the ship's commanding officer. The Life Force donation program had indeed enhanced human capabilities. Morrison's reflexes were 30% faster than baseline human norms. Her cognitive processing had improved measurably, and her expected lifespan had increased by an estimated 40 years. Hard to believe it's been only 2 years, Sarah mused, watching the orbital traffic around the planet. Kithara vessels moved alongside human ships in carefully coordinated patterns, a sight that would have been unimaginable when she first made her proposal to the Council. The expansion of the volunteer program had been the most ambitious humanitarian effort in human history. After the breakthrough discoveries about the mutual benefits of controlled life force donation, the response from Earth had been overwhelming. Instead of having to recruit volunteers, the program had developed waiting lists. Nearly 50,000 humans had participated in at least one donation session, with 10,000 serving as regular, long-term donors. The process had been refined far beyond Webb's original protocols. Mobile donation units allowed volunteers to contribute from locations across human space, while automated monitoring systems ensured precise regulation of the process. More importantly, the artificial synthesis project had finally succeeded.
Ambassador, came a familiar voice through the communication system.
It was Vorthak, the original Kithara delegate who had made that desperate plea to the Council 2 years ago.
He was almost unrecognizable now. His form had not only recovered, but had developed a vitality that surpassed even historical descriptions of healthy Kithara. Vorthak, Sarah replied warmly. How are preparations for the ceremony? Nearly complete. The Council of Regeneration is eager to make this announcement official. But Sarah, His voice carried a tone she had learned to recognize as deep emotion in the Cathara. I wanted to speak with you privately before the formal proceedings. There is something I must share. Sarah made her way to the ship's diplomatic suite, where Vorthak was waiting along with Dr. Benetreed, Webb, and several other key figures from both species. The room had been specially designed to accommodate Cathara physiology, with ambient lighting that allowed their skin to display its full spectrum of color-based communication. "What is it, my friend?" Sarah asked, settling into her chair. Vorthak's skin shifted through several complex patterns before he spoke. "Yesterday, we received the final confirmation from our deep space probes. Kithros Prime has entered its final death spiral. The planet will be completely uninhabitable within 6 months." Sarah felt a pang of sadness despite expecting this news. The Cathara homeworld had been dying when the crisis began, and even their advanced technology couldn't reverse the stellar collapse that had doomed their solar system. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I know how difficult it must be to lose your ancestral home." "That is not why I wished to speak with you," Vorthak continued, his skin pattern shifting to what Sarah had learned indicated profound gratitude.
Yesterday was also the day we saved the last survivors from the homeworld.
Every Cathara who could be saved has been saved. Our species numbers nearly 30,000 souls. Not since the Great Expansion 3 millennia ago have we been so numerous and healthy. Dr. Webb leaned forward. "The artificial synthesis facilities are producing enough life force to sustain your entire population independently. You no longer need human donors to survive." "Precisely," Vorthak said. "Which brings me to what I must tell you. The Council of Regeneration has made a decision that will change everything." He paused, his skin cycling through patterns that Sarah recognized as determination mixed with reverence. "We are formally renouncing predation," he announced. "Not just as a temporary measure or as part of our agreement with humanity, but as a permanent transformation of our species. We will never again feed on unwilling beings. We will never again take life force from those who have not freely offered it." The silence in the room was profound. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as she realized the full magnitude of what Vorthak was saying. "Furthermore," he continued, "we are offering to share our complete biotechnology database with all species in the galaxy, not just humanity. Our energy manipulation techniques, our medical knowledge, our industrial capabilities, everything we have learned in 3 millennia of civilization." "But that's worth," Webb started, then stopped, clearly overwhelmed by the implications. "More than the gross domestic product of most stellar civilizations," Vorthak finished. "We know. We are also establishing the Redemption Foundation, a permanent organization dedicated to providing aid to any civilization that has suffered under Cathara predation. We have identified 43 species that deserve reparations, and we will spend the next several centuries working to repair the damage our ancestors caused."
Sarah was speechless.
The transformation was so complete, so unprecedented, that she struggled to process it. "Why?" she finally asked. "I mean, I'm grateful beyond words, but why are you taking such extreme measures?" Vorthak's skin shifted to patterns Sarah had never seen before, something that seemed to indicate emotion beyond their usual range. "Because you taught us something we had forgotten. Over millennia of predation," he said. "You taught us what it means to give freely, to offer help without expectation of return. When your people volunteered to feed us, knowing the risks, asking for nothing in return except our promise to change, we remembered what we had once been." He stood and moved to the viewport, gazing out at the planet that had become his people's new home. "Our earliest records speak of a time when the Cathara were not predators but gardeners. We tended life force like humans tend crops, nurturing it, helping it grow, taking only what was freely given. Somewhere in our expansion across the galaxy, we forgot this. We became parasites instead of symbionts." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now we remember. The humans who have fed us these past 2 years, their willing gift has changed us at a fundamental level. We are becoming what we once were, not predators, but partners in the cultivation of life itself." Dr. Webb activated his tablet, showing biological readouts that Sarah had seen many times before. "The psychological changes in the Cathara have been remarkable. Feeding on willing donors versus unwilling victims has literally rewired their neural pathways. They're developing empathy, cooperative instincts, and creative problem-solving abilities that were suppressed by centuries of predatory behavior. But it's more than psychology," Vorthak added. "It's spiritual, if you'll permit the term. For the first time in millennia, my people sleep without nightmares. We no longer carry the psychic weight of countless unwilling deaths. We are free." Sarah wiped away the tears that had been steadily flowing throughout Vorthak's explanation. So what happens now? What does this mean for the volunteer program? That is something we wish to discuss with you, Vorthak said, returning to his seat. The artificial synthesis meets our survival needs, but many of us have found that feeding from willing human donors provides benefits beyond mere sustenance. The emotional connection, the mutual enhancement of both species, we believe this represents the future of interspecies cooperation. You're talking about a permanent symbiotic relationship, Webb said, his scientific excitement evident. More than that, Vorthak replied. We're talking about evolutionary partnership. Humans who regularly donate develop enhanced capabilities. Kythara who feed from willing donors develop greater empathy and creativity. Together, we are becoming something neither species could achieve alone. Sarah considered the implications. It would require completely restructuring our understanding of interspecies relationships. Instead of trade or alliance based on resources or military cooperation, we're talking about biological partnership. The first of its kind in recorded galactic history, Vorthak confirmed. And we believe it will not be the last. The Andromedans have expressed interest in energy-sharing experiments with our people. The Zephyrians want to explore resonance harmonics between their crystalline matrices and our life force manipulation abilities. Even the Altarians, who have the most reason to hate us, have agreed to joint research projects. Captain Morrison's voice came through the intercom. Ambassador, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's the Secretary General. Sarah activated the communication system, and the image of Secretary General Martinez appeared on the main display. His expression was a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Sarah, I hope you're sitting down, he said without preamble. The preliminary reports from the Kythara technology transfer are extraordinary. Their biotechnology could eliminate most human diseases within a decade. Their energy manipulation techniques could revolutionize our power generation and space travel. And their industrial capabilities. He paused, shaking his head. Sarah, we're looking at a technological leap equivalent to several centuries of normal development. But that's not why I'm calling, Martinez continued. 30 minutes ago, the Galactic Council voted unanimously, Sarah, to establish the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative based on the Human Kythera Partnership Model. 47 civilizations want to explore symbiotic relationships with each other. They're calling it the Chen Doctrine. Sarah felt dizzy. The Chen Doctrine? Named after the human ambassador who first proposed that mercy and mutual aid could transform interspecies relations, Martinez explained with a smile. Congratulations, Sarah. Your leap of faith has fundamentally changed the galaxy. After the transmission ended, Sarah sat in stunned silence. Around her, the representatives of both species were discussing the practical implications of the new galactic initiative, but she found herself thinking about that desperate day 2 years ago, when she had stood before the council and offered humanity as food for their ancient enemies.
Sarah, Vorthak said gently.
You seem troubled. Are you not pleased with these developments? Sarah looked up at him, seeing not the skeletal, desperate figure from that first council session, but a being transformed, healthy, vital, and genuinely caring about her emotional state. I'm amazed, she said honestly. 2 years ago, I was terrified that I was condemning humanity to become prey for galactic predators. Now it turns out we've accidentally created a new model for interspecies evolution. Not accidentally, Vorthak corrected. You made a choice based on compassion rather than fear, on hope rather than hatred. Everything that followed came from that fundamental decision to value life above safety, mercy above revenge. Dr. Webb looked up from his tablet, where he had been reviewing the cascade of data coming from the new partnerships being proposed across the galaxy. Sarah, I've been thinking about something, he said. The Kythara needed life force to survive, and we had an abundance of it. But every species has something they produce in excess and something they need. The Andromedians have surplus energy, but lack biological complexity. The Zephyrians have unparalleled computational power, but struggle with creative problem-solving. The Mechanoids have incredible manufacturing capabilities, but no intuitive understanding of organic needs. You're suggesting that the entire galaxy could function as one giant symbiotic system, Sarah said, beginning to understand the scope of what they had initiated. Exactly. Instead of each species developing in isolation, competing for resources and territory, we could create networks of mutual support that enhance every civilization involved. Vorthak's skin patterns had shifted to something Sarah had never seen before. Complex, flowing designs that seemed to incorporate elements from multiple Kythara emotional expressions. What does that pattern mean? She asked. We have no word for it in any language, Vorthak replied. It is the emotion one feels when witnessing the birth of a new age. Our children will grow up in a galaxy where cooperation replaces competition, where diversity is a source of strength rather than conflict.
Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, looking down at the thriving Kythara settlement below. Ships from dozens of different species were landing and departing, carrying the first delegations of what would become the greatest period of interspecies cooperation in galactic history. "You know what the most incredible part is?" she said. "We started this just trying to prevent one species from going extinct. We had no idea we were about to transform galactic civilization itself." "Perhaps that is always how the greatest changes begin," Vorthak suggested. "Not with grand plans or ambitious schemes, but with simple acts of compassion that ripple outward beyond our ability to predict or control."
6 months later, Sarah stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber, but the atmosphere was completely different from that desperate emergency session 2 years earlier. The chamber buzzed with excitement rather than fear, cooperation rather than competition. The formal announcement was being made by the Cetacean moderator, whose ancient wisdom had guided the Council through its transformation. "The Interspecies Cooperation Initiative has exceeded all projections," she announced. 47 civilizations are now participating in symbiotic partnerships. Medical advances have eliminated diseases that have plagued multiple species for millennia. Energy sharing has allowed resource-poor systems to develop advanced infrastructure. Cultural exchanges have sparked innovations in art, science, and philosophy across the galaxy. Sarah listened with pride as the achievements were catalogued. The Kythara Redemption Foundation had already provided aid to 15 formerly oppressed civilizations. Human volunteers had helped establish life force cultivation programs on 12 different worlds. Joint research projects had produced breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel, quantum computing, and biotechnology. But perhaps most importantly, no species had gone to war with another since the initiative began. When civilizations could enhance each other through cooperation, conflict became not just morally wrong, but economically illogical. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth," the moderator announced, "architect of the doctrine that has transformed our galaxy from a collection of competing civilizations into a cooperative community of life." Sarah stood, feeling the weight of history in the moment. Around her, representatives of dozens of species, including several who had once been bitter enemies, applauded her contributions to galactic peace. "Honored delegates," she began. 2 years ago, I stood in this chamber and made an offer that many considered foolish or dangerous. Today, I realize that the real danger would have been letting fear prevent us from trying something new." She paused, looking around the chamber at the faces, and non-faces, of beings who had learned to see diversity as opportunity rather than threat. "The galaxy we have built together in these past 2 years proves that the greatest problems can become the greatest opportunities when we approach them with open hearts and willing minds." The Kythara was starving, and humanity stepped forward to help. In saving them, we discovered something that has saved us all: the power of symbiosis to transform not just individuals or species, but entire civilizations. As the session concluded and delegates began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by representatives wanting to thank her or propose new cooperation projects. But through the crowd, she caught sight of Vorthak waiting patiently near the chamber's exit. When she finally reached him, he extended his hand in the human gesture he had learned to appreciate. "Thank you," he said simply, "not just for my people, but for showing all of us what we could become." Sarah shook his hand, marveling at how different this moment felt from their first desperate meeting 2 years earlier. "Thank you for teaching us that even the most dangerous predators can choose to become gardeners instead," she replied. Together, they walked out of the chamber toward a future that neither of their species could have imagined alone, but which both had made possible by choosing compassion over fear, hope over hatred, and cooperation over competition. The vampire aliens had been starving. A human had stepped forward, and in that simple act of mercy, the galaxy itself had been transformed.